Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something really central to leadership right now, dealing with, well, everything. The sheer complexity and volatility out there. We're talking VUCA volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. It's pretty clear that just going with your gut or relying on past plays, it's just not cutting it anymore. So our mission today is really to give you a solid framework, something to help cut through all that noise. And the source material we looked at makes a really sharp point. Often, the worst decisions leaders make aren't necessarily the ones that were just plain wrong. They're the rushed ones, the ones made under pressure without being anchored to something solid. So we're going to explore how you can actually filter those complex choices through core, unchanging principles, and how that can turn all that uncertainty outside into, well, a strategic advantage, something that builds real resilience.
That's absolutely the leverage point. I mean, think about it. When everything around you is shifting constantly, market trends, tech, what people expect, a leader who's grounded in clear, enduring principles, they have an immediate strategic edge. It's just built in. Those principles become your stable reference point. They let you navigate the chaos, rather than just getting swept away by it.
Okay, so let's unpack that. A really good place to start, I think, is this tension between two words we often use almost interchangeably, rules and principles. Why is sticking to principles actually better than just having a really detailed rule book? And what happens when we lean too hard on those rules?
Yeah, that distinction is, well, it's fundamental for wise leadership. Rules are very specific, right? They're prescriptive. They tell you exactly what to do in a situation you already recognize, like stop at a red light or submit your expense report by Friday. They're for familiar territory. But the problem is, rules have limits. They can be bent, they expire, or, this is crucial, they can lead to what the material calls a loophole mentality.
Ah, the loophole mentality,
Mm.
where people just do the bare minimum to technically follow the rule, right?
Yeah.
But they totally miss the spirit behind it.
Precisely. You get external compliance, maybe out of fear of getting caught, but not genuine conviction. Principles, on the other hand, are different. They're more like fundamental truths. They're directional, they're enduring, they're often non-negotiable. Think concepts like integrity or stewardship, fairness, respect. These guide you when there isn't a specific rule, when the path forward is totally unclear. They act like a moral compass, a strategic guide that works even when the map is useless.
That really crystallizes during like a serious ethical challenge, doesn't it? The source material had this great example. Imagine you're running a startup, growing fast, and boom, you discover a rival is basically stealing your secrets. Industrial espionage. Your employee handbook. It's got rules about, I don't know, using company email, but nothing about how to fight back against a competitor playing dirty.
Exactly. There's no rule for that. So you have to fall back on your principles. Let's say your core principles include integrity and maybe long-term vision. Well, right away, those principles narrow your options significantly. You just can't ethically justify hitting back with your own dirty tricks, even if you're furious, right? It violates integrity. So the principle-anchored decision becomes something like, focus our energy on out-innovating them, on winning cleanly, maintaining that ethical high ground.
And that kind of response, it signals something really powerful internally, doesn't it? It moves beyond just worrying about getting caught. It shows genuine internal conviction. Your team sees that even when things get really tough, the company sticks to what it says it stands for.
That's exactly how you forge organizational trust.
Yeah.
It's built on that kind of consistency, especially when sticking to the principle is actually the harder, maybe more expensive choice in the short run.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. Let's talk about the flip side, the dangers of reactive trend-chasing decisions. It often feels like you're being agile, responding quickly. But why is that approach actually so perilous, according to the sources?
Well, the danger really unfolds in, I'd say, three main ways. First, it breeds short-sightedness. You end up sacrificing long-term strategy just to jump on the latest bandwagon or make the quarterly numbers look good. Second, it chips away at trust and credibility. If your decisions seem to flip-flop based on the latest trend, people start asking, what do they really stand for? There's no consistency. But maybe the most insidious danger is the third one. You end up amplifying volatility inside the organization.
You mean the company itself starts becoming chaotic, like just mirroring the panic or hype that's happening outside?
Precisely. The organization becomes a kind of frantic reflection of the external chaos. If the leadership team is making calls based on immediate fear or the latest shocking headline or, frankly, just ego, that instability, that internal whiplash, it gets transmitted outwards to employees, to customers, everywhere.
So if the problem is external chaos constantly buffeting us, why isn't the answer just better internal rules, stricter processes maybe? Why does the material push towards something deeper and anchor beyond just, our own understanding?
It's a great question. It's because the core problem isn't just the chaos outside, it's also the instability of the decision maker under pressure. The material points out that instability often comes from leaning too heavily on our immediate reactive selves. Our emotions in that moment, our fear of missing out, our fear of loss, maybe even our ego telling us we know best right now. And those immediate feelings, those biases, they can make us rationalize short-term decisions that actually contradict our deeper long-term values.
Okay, and this is where the source material brings in that foundational idea from Proverbs 3.5 to 6. It's framed in a really interesting way here, not just as like spiritual advice, but as a kind of ultimate operational principle for stability. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him and he will make your path straight.
Exactly. It's presented as the ultimate principle of constancy, of stability. The strategic insight there is actually pretty counterintuitive for a lot of leaders. It says the best way to navigate complexity is to actively not lean solely on your own immediate understanding, your own reactive thoughts. Instead, you anchor your choices in something unchanging, something beyond the immediate flux.
And the promise there is straight paths. Not necessarily easy paths, maybe, but clear, reliable direction. Because they're rooted in principle, not in panic or fleeting perception.
Right. It subtly shifts the focus. Instead of trying to manage every single outcome, which is impossible in complexity, you focus on managing your faithfulness to the principle. And that faithfulness, paradoxically, provides incredible clarity, even when everything else feels chaotic.
Okay, let's get down to brass tacks then. Anchoring in principles sounds good, maybe a bit lofty. How does it actually work when the pressure is on, financially, operationally? Give us an example of this filter in action. Let's take that supply chain dilemma from the material. Your company finds out a key supplier, maybe one that saves you a lot of money, is using exploitative labor practices. The reactive choice. Bury it. Switching costs a fortune, messes up Q4. How does the principal filter change that calculus?
Well, the reactive choice is purely circumstantial, isn't it? It's laser-focused on immediate cost and disruption avoidance. That's it. But the principle-anchored approach, it immediately forces you to elevate principles like fairness, human dignity, maybe even long-term reputation, and upholding those principles demands action. It likely means changing suppliers, probably immediately, despite the short-term financial hit and the operational headache. And then, that difficult choice actually transforms the crisis. It becomes a strategic opportunity.
An opportunity for what, though? Beyond just feeling good?
An opportunity to cement your reputation, not just with customers, but crucially, with your own people, your best employees. You reinforce the company culture, you demonstrate real conviction, and you actually build a more sustainable, ethical foundation for the long term. The principle provided the clarity that the immediate circumstances were trying to obscure.
This ties directly into that tool the sources mentioned, the principle versus circumstance decision matrix. It forces that comparison, right? Weighing the immediate gain against the enduring value. Let's use it on the really tough leadership classic.
Yeah.
The layoff scenario.
Yeah, that's always a brutal one.
Yeah.
The scenario is the leadership team is debating laying off, say, 15% of the workforce, the main driver, boosting immediate Q4 profitability to satisfy maybe some impatient shareholders. The alternative is exploring other, perhaps more painful internally but less damaging to people. Options like aggressive cost-cutting elsewhere, maybe restructuring debt.
So if you look only at that circumstantial factor, immediate profitability layoffs score really high, right? A definite double plus on the matrix. Quick, measurable financial impact. That pressure is intense.
It is intense, and that's often where leaders stumble. They get fixated on that circumstantial rating because it feels urgent and concrete. But then you run the layoff option through the principle filter. You evaluate it against things like integrity, stewardship of people, fairness, long-term organizational health. And suddenly, the layoff option scores terribly, like strongly violates across the board. Why? Because it essentially treats human capital as disposable, it decimates morale, and it signals that short-term optics trump loyalty and people.
Okay, but let me push back slightly here.
Yeah.
That shareholder pressure, the financial reality, isn't that a real circumstance? Doesn't stewardship also mean keeping the company afloat? I mean, if ignoring the shareholders tanks the stock and the company goes under, haven't we failed all the employees? Where's the balance?
That's the absolute core tension, you're right. And the material addresses this. True stewardship, it argues, involves balancing the financial realities without sacrificing your most critical long-term assets. And your people, your culture, your ethical reputation, those are critical long-term assets. They're not just expenses on a spreadsheet. So the matrix analysis, when done honestly, often reveals that the alternative path, the aggressive internal cost-cutting, maybe the debt restructuring, focusing on operational efficiency, yes, it offers a less dramatic immediate profit spike for Q4, but it scores incredibly well, maybe double plus, across all the principles.
Because that path shows integrity, it tries to preserve the team, it prioritizes long-term health, even if it means more shared sacrifice now.
Exactly. The principle-anchored solution aims for sustainable, ethical health. It acknowledges that just maximizing profit right now by discarding people isn't good stewardship. It's often a failure of it in the long run.
That's a scenario I think almost everyone listening can probably relate to in some way. And the sources apply this same filter to other tough calls too, right? Like the high-performing but toxic employee. Keeping them might boost this quarter's numbers, but it absolutely shreds principles like respect and stewardship of the overall culture. The principle filter demands action, even if it hurts the bottom line short term.
Absolutely. So, okay, for the listener, what's the practical takeaway? How do you start doing this? It really begins with defining your own North Star. You actually need to sit down and name your non-negotiables. What are, say, the 5 core principles that will define how you lead, regardless of the situation? Because if you haven't explicitly named them, it's almost impossible to consistently adhere to them when the pressure hits.
That clarity seems key. It shifts you from just reacting to whatever's loudest to proactively choosing based on your own defined values.
And then critically, you need to follow that up with what the material calls a principle audit. Basically, a regular, honest check-in. You have to ask yourself, and maybe trusted colleagues, where did fear or exhaustion or external pressure cause me or us to compromise on these principles we supposedly hold dear? Getting candid feedback on that specific point, especially from people who report to you, is incredibly valuable, though maybe uncomfortable.
Okay, let's tackle something you hinted at earlier, an advanced challenge. What happens when 2 of your core principles seem to genuinely clash in a specific situation? Like the classic example. The principle of absolute honesty versus the principle of compassion.
Right. This is where adhering to principles moves beyond just following a checklist and into the realm of real wisdom and discernment. When principles appear to collide, the goal is never to just toss one out. Instead, you have to dig deeper. You move beyond a rigid, maybe rule-like interpretation, the letter of the principle, to understand the underlying intent, the spirit.
So in that example of, say, telling a loved one about a really grim medical diagnosis, absolute, blunt honesty might be brutal.
Exactly. That's where you apply what the material calls hierarchical discernment. You have to ask, in this specific context, which principle, when applied thoughtfully, best serves the greater good or the overarching mission or maybe just human flourishing? The goal isn't brutal honesty or our deceptive compassion. It's compassionate truth-telling. You find a way to prioritize the principle that leads to the best possible outcome in that complex situation. It often means tempering one principle with the wisdom of another rather than letting them destroy each other. It requires maturity, reflection, definitely not a snap judgment.
Can we talk for a second about how this feels for the leader? When you achieve that kind of consistency, that stability, even when everything outside is swirling, what's the personal impact?
Oh, the personal benefit is actually profound. When you consistently make decisions anchored in principles you genuinely believe in, it dramatically reduces internal stress and anxiety. There's a certain peace that comes from knowing you made the call based on your core values, your anchor, even if the outcome isn't immediately perfect or popular. You become somewhat immune to the constant second-guessing from the market or the shifting winds of opinion among peers. You build this inner resilience because your center of gravity is stable and unchanging. You stop feeling like you're being tossed around by every wave, and you start feeling more like the anchor itself.
So wrapping this up for everyone listening today, I think the biggest takeaway is that real leadership isn't about somehow avoiding complexity. That's impossible. It's about finding clarity within that complexity, and that clarity comes from conviction, from being anchored. Principles aren't just nice ideas. They're the actual architects of your culture, your stability, and ultimately your organization's destiny, much more than quarterly earnings reports.
I couldn't agree more. And if you zoom out even further, it really underscores the idea of ultimate accountability, doesn't it? At the end of the day, the accountability that truly matters isn't to the fluctuating market trends or the loudest voices in the room or even quarterly reports. It's accountability to truth, to principle, because those are the only things that genuinely endure.
So here's something to think about as we close. When people look back on your leadership, maybe even on your life, will they say you were someone who chased the fleeting opportunity of the moment? Or will they say you chased truth? That's a pretty powerful question to anchor your next big decision.